Joining us right now via phone is Austin Ruse. He has an article out at Crisis Magazine, crisismagazine.com. The headline says, "The wages of sin is also disease." You know, I got criticized, I don't know, it was last week, maybe it was probably the week before, suggesting that there is some connection between monkeypox and sodomy, homosexuality. I don't know where I would get such things, but we've invited Austin Ruse to give us some insight on this. Good morning. Good morning to you, Austin Ruse. Thanks for joining our program. Austin, are you there?
I am here.
Hey, good morning to you. Thanks for being on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Praise be to God. Your article, "The Wages of Sin is Also Disease," reminds me of something I heard or read from Dr. Scott Hahn many years ago about the price of sin. The consequence of sin is the sin itself, right? So I drink too much, I become an alcoholic. That comes with consequences. That comes with baggage. Homosexuality has the same results, wouldn't you say?
Well, sure. It is a deeply sinful way of life. The great psychiatrist one time described homosexuality as a bad habit, as a way of life. It's not an identity. It's a behavior, and so certain behaviors have certain results. And gosh, I was just reading an alert. There's this nasty annual event out in the streets of San Francisco. The name of it escapes me. It's about to start, but it's just like open nastiness everywhere. Mm-hmm. Our friend Joe Schamberg goes out there and passes out rosaries to this event every year. But and what they're advertising, even in the age of monkeypox for that community, they're giving them tips about how to avoid monkeypox and things like that, and have all the great fun that you want and avoid monkeypox. So yeah, there are consequences to certain kinds of behaviors, and that kind of behavior comes with a whole lot of consequences. And you'll notice in my piece I quoted a paper from 15 years ago by the great Dale O'Leary, where she talked about the confluence of certain aspects of that way of life: violence, drunkenness, drugs, sexual diseases, all converge in what's called a syndemic. And this has been the case in that community since time immemorial, and especially since they were all, since they all came out of the closet and started going crazy, 25 years ago.
I think it was like last week, I retweeted something from the Herald Sun that said World Health Organization has called for an unprecedented sex shutdown amid fears monkeypox is racing towards becoming an endemic STD. And I was like, I didn't see myself ever agreeing to the World Health Organization, but here we are.
The great oracle.
Yeah. I mean, you would think refraining from this type of behavior would be common sense to the world, but it just isn't, is it?
Well, no, and it's funny because people are largely unwilling to even mention this particular connection. There was this moment on the Kennedy's show on Fox Business, I guess she's on now. It was a panel where they were talking about this and about monkeypox, and one of the panelists said, the answer here is just don't get involved in gay orgies. And two of the panelists, including Kennedy, called this guy a bigot, even for drawing the connection, which came right out of a scientific study that he was quoting from. So even quoting and drawing conclusions from the science is bigoted if it goes the wrong way against a protected class of person.
Yeah, in your article, there's several points in there I think that are really, really good. Here's one that says, quote, "In the subways of both cities, you can see advertisements for something called PrEP, a gay party drug that claims to allow unremitting sexual activity with no HIV consequences." I mean, again, we're like advertising this, to whomever walks by, like young people, for instance. I mean, it's perverse.
Well, yeah. It's hard, my family and I, we have young children, 13 and 17, and we go to New York City 2 or 3 times a year. And it's riding the subway is an adventure, because they have these ads for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is they have these ads for PrEP, which is a gay party drug. And you take it and you go and you have all the wildness that you want. and it's supposed to prevent infection from HIV. Now, we were startled. My wife was startled when she discovered that in the Arlington County, in the Fairfax County School District here in Northern Virginia, they were pushing PrEP on school children, telling them all about PrEP, recommending PrEP to them. So this whole ethos is just wildly out of control. But yeah, PrEP is a really shocking thing, especially when you see it advertised in public on the New York City public school subways.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different stuff that you'll see. I mean, I was there in 2012, and it seems like an eternity ago. But yeah, if you go into the subway, you see all the advertisements. There's some really strange, questionable material up there, and there's videos of people taking stuff down. But I'm wondering, you know, they are presenting this PrEP drug as some sort of something good, right? I mean, this ultimately does not end in a person with same-sex attractions common good. So how is it that we can, instead of promote something like that, how is it that we can lead these people back into a chaste life, which is what they're called to be?
Well, that's the $60,000 question, you know, and I really don't have an answer for that. You know, the Catholic Church offers this wonderful program called Courage, which tries to draw young men and women away from that style of life. You know, and as I say in the piece, there are still some brave psychiatrists and psychologists who will assist some people who are highly motivated to leave that style of life. And one of the great lies that side has told about these efforts is that, you know, it's immoral to try to get somebody to change, that it's impossible to get somebody to change, that it's torturous to get somebody to change. But that's simply not the case. You know, there may be been some wacky, you know, evangelical programs over the years, but for the most part, it's talk therapy, where you don't want to be doing a certain thing. You go and you seek professional help to stop doing that particular thing. And just to reiterate, homosexuality is a behavior. It is not an identity. It's not something that you're born with. It is something that you can walk away from. But as the psychiatrist will say, you have to be highly motivated, and that's the case in any course of psychotherapy, psychology. You have to be motivated to change, and if you're motivated to change, change can happen. But now we're seeing all over this country, cities and towns making it illegal to offer talk therapy for something that bothers you. In this case, same-sex attraction and behavior.
You also talk about how it's almost happening exclusively among men. Did you hear that story of those two young boys that had been infected?
The two young boys who'd been infected? No, I have not heard that story.
Yeah, and they were connected to a group of man-boy love advocates. I mean, it's again, very disgusting and perverse. But yet you get this homophobia label every time you try to make these connections.
Well, you know, gosh, who did I see recently on Facebook announcing that he had his first homosexual? Maybe it was George Takei, who was on Star Trek,
on Twitter,
announcing that he was 13 when he had his first sexual experience with an older male. They celebrate this unless you point it out. If you point it out, then you're a hater and a bigot. But they actually celebrate, you know, the quote losing of their virginity. And that's kind of a sick phrase to use for this particular case. But yeah, it is celebrated in the gay community.
Sort of relating back to AIDS, right? HIV/AIDS, and how when that started breaking out, they were reluctant to admit that connection too, back to the homosexual lifestyle, homosexual community. Do you see any great parallels here?
Well, you know, I'm old enough to remember the cover. Well, I'm old enough to remember when news magazines meant something, when they were huge and everybody read them. And I remember the cover of Newsweek magazine that basically said that everybody was going to get HIV.
Right.
And I remember it's like everybody would get tested too. You know, it was a little bit like COVID, where, you know, if you got the sniffles, you had to get tested. And now we know that not everybody can get it. Mm-hmm. It's generally, you know, and to this day, it is limited to a particular community, which is the gay community, people who use same needles and shooting up drugs and things like that. And I quoted this paper from the remarkable Dale O'Leary, who was she's still alive, an independent researcher who was very active, 10, 20 years ago. She was well ahead of everybody on everything. She wrote a wonderful book called The Gender Agenda, which 25 years ago spelled out everything that we're going through now. Anyway, she wrote a paper about this pandemic that's going on in the gay community, and that's where it's happening. It's like they have diseases in that community that we thought we had cured, that are roaring back with a vengeance. And then if there were things in the piece that my editor took out,
wow,
about some of the things that I came across, these circuit parties and going to Fire Island, and there's a particular the hotel on Fire Island that's closest to Boy Beach, and they have a bear party there, and all this kind of stuff that would be utterly foreign to regular people, which is the common currency of the homosexual style of life.
Mr. Ruse, I'm wondering what your take is on the changing of psychological definitions. I can't remember the name of the book that's used for psychology, but changes from time to time. And it used to be that homosexuality was considered it was considered more of like a mental disorder, but now it's not. How do you see the psychological framework nowadays? Is it infiltrated by people who want to redefine things, or was it always kind of straightforward?
I will commend to you a very important article by a psychiatrist named Jeffrey Satinover called The Velvet Couch. And he tells the story of how the definition in the psychological diagnostic manual was changed. And it was changed through politics and bullying and threats, and not through science. I cover a lot of this material in one of my previous books called Fake Science, where I look at the development of the change in the definition of homosexuality as a psychological condition. And quite frankly, when you look at where it comes from, and even the Catholic Catechism says that it has a psychological origin. It says the psychological origin of homosexuality is indeterminate, but it says it's a psychological condition, and it is. It's not inborn. There's never been a gay gene discovered, and they rely on this particular thing for a whole host of reasons to change the definition in psychiatry, to ensure that that homosexual behavior is not legally penalized. And just think of the Lawrence v. Texas decision that predated the Obergefell same-sex marriage decision. Lawrence v. Texas said that a particular homosexual act is constitutionally protected. So you go back and you look at how all of this changed. It's pretty, one thing I say about this is hats off to these guys for what they were able to achieve in such a short amount of time. It's quite astounding. I'll commend to you a really wonderful book by Robert Riley called Making Gay Okay. And he goes through how they were able to change society almost overnight on these issues. But changing the diagnostic manual was the first and most important thing that they did.
Austin, I was just thinking about what you're saying here, and it's really surprising to me the fact that people seem to not care about they being natural when this whole time the same people who are doing these unnatural acts are the same people who are saying, oh, we need to use crystals, oh, we need to use holistic remedies, oh, we need to use these kind of things. But then in the same vein, there'll be vegans and this whole thing, but they will then do these unnatural acts that are exactly contrary to nature and has now more and more been proven to cause disease and things like monkeypox, things like AIDS, like we've been talking about. Why do you think there's this move between the same community to be natural, but then also to be completely unnatural?
Yeah, that is a really good question. That's a really good question. It's the same thing with the contraceptive pill. People who would not put foreign substances into their bodies because they're unhealthy. That they will only eat organically raised, vegetables, but they will take the contraceptive pill, which shuts down an entire system in their bodies. So yeah, it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle. I mean, at the heart of all of this is the desire to be completely and utterly free from constraints that they believe will keep them from happiness. So they believe that they will not be happy unless they have complete unfettered sexual freedom. It's funny. There's a couple of books coming out. One just came out. I can't remember the name of it. There's another one coming out of Great Britain here in a couple of weeks. A feminist announcing against the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution has been poison to men and women, especially women. So maybe the pendulum is swinging. I don't know. We can only hope so.
It's another interesting thing is that there's a movement to try to normalize homosexuality. I mean, obviously that's happened already with legalizing gay marriage, but trying to make heterosexuals think that you can do gay things without actually being a homosexual yourself. What I mean is, so people will say, "Oh, just because you do a gay act doesn't actually make you homosexual." And an example of this is people talking about heterosexual orgies, and the very word of orgy, the definition of what it is, implies that it's going to be homosexual to some degree. Do you seen anything with that movement of trying to make people say, "Hey, you can do homosexual acts without actually being a homosexual"? I've seen that quite a bit, and it's quite odd and concerning.
And one of the problems with that notion is, as psychiatrist friends tell me, is that homosexuality is basically a bad habit. And you can get into that habit. The great Joe Shambra, who used to live in that world and now is out of it and is trying to bring some of his brothers out of that whole world, said, that one of the reasons that he went into that world is because in his fevered imagination, even prostitutes would not do the things that he wanted to do. But he found an eager population in the gay community, and that becomes habituated. And that certainly becomes habituated with young men who are then confused in these particular situations because they had a particular response. And so then you have a particular response again, and you go, "Oh, well, this is the way that I am." So yeah, it is a very dangerous thing to try and to allow habituation to set in with these particular ideas. One wonders the effect in that way that pornography has on people, because you see things and you see behaviors that you wouldn't necessarily see. And maybe in the beginning you find them offensive, but then you don't. It is a kind of recruitment. There's no question about that.
Yeah, slippery slope, right? You're on the same slope from heterosexual perverse sexual behavior to homosexual perverse sexual behavior. It's the same sliding slope when it comes to pornography, for sure. Which we have a couple of minutes left with Austin Ruse here, so let me tie into that a little bit to say, as Adrian was saying, we seem to be normalizing this behavior, making it seem like it's somehow okay. You can dabble; it's perfectly fine, even within marriage between man and a woman. But I see, okay, where is the defense for marriage between man and a woman? Even within the church, we seem to not really be speaking out in a significant way, and I'm thinking of the bishops in particular, trying to defend traditional marriage against these sort of perversities in society. We see rather somewhat of a passive embracing of this behavior and trying to pretend like it's somehow okay or normal. What say you, Austin Ruse?
I attended the wake and funeral of a young woman last week. Her name is Mary Teller here in Northern Virginia. And she came from a big family here in Northern Virginia. And I went to her wake. There was an hour-long wait to say a prayer in front of the casket and greet the family. And at the funeral mass, it was standing room only at a big church in Washington, D.C. Pardon me, our Monday morning is when they mow the yard here in our office complex. And what occurred to me is that her mom and dad, Bill and Betsy Moss, didn't just form a family. They founded a family. And what that meant was that they had a lot of kids who then had a lot of friends who were from overlapping communities. The Heights School here in Maryland, Oakcrest School for Girls in Virginia, the University of Dallas. And so they founded a family that reached out across the country. And I don't know, I'm going to write about this at Crisis this week and probably write about it again in a few weeks. The idea of not just forming a family, that is to say getting married, but founding a family, the idea of practically founding a dynasty that will reach down through the ages, which is precisely what Bill and Betsy Moss did. And it just showed abundantly the power of that. Anyway, just a little bit of rambling that's been on my mind since I went to Mary Teller's wake and funeral. It was astounding. It was really moving.
Yeah, we need to defend marriage. In a world that wants to toss it out like garbage or refuse, we must stand up and be light and salt in a dark, dark world. Austin Ruse, thank you for your time today. We appreciate you. Check him out online at crisismagazine.org. Look for his article, The Wages of Sin is Also Disease. God bless you, Austin. Have a great day. That's going to do it for hour number one. If you can join us in the second hour, John Carney from Breitbart's going to be on talking about the economy. What do those numbers actually mean for you? That's coming up next. Otherwise, we'll see you back here tomorrow morning. God bless you. God love you. We'll see you then.